Back in 1949, a book was published that asked a question so fundamental it literally shook the world. That book was The Second Sex by the French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, and it took a sledgehammer to the very definition of what it means to be a woman.
Okay, let's just dive right in with the single most famous line from the entire book. This one sentence, this is the whole ballgame. This is the revolutionary idea that would go on to ignite a global movement. So what on earth did she actually mean by this?
To really get that quote, you first have to understand this crucial distinction that she helped make famous. See, on one hand, you've got biological sex. That's the physical hardware, the facts of being born male or female. But on the other hand, you have gender. And gender, de Beauvoir argued, is basically a social construct. It's all the rules, all the behaviors, all the expectations that society loads onto you, essentially teaching you how to be a man or how to be a woman.
So you have to ask, what kind of world makes a philosopher ask such a basic question? Well, to get to Beauvoir's rebellion, you have to picture the world she was rebelling against. We're talking about the super rigid, upper-class French society she was born into way back in 1908.
It was a society with just suffocating rules. A world where your entire life path felt like it was set in stone the second you were born. A woman's destiny? It wasn't her own. Her job was to get a good marriage, and her value was literally calculated by the size of her dowry. De Beauvoir's own mother was terrified she wouldn't have enough money for a proper one, seeing it as the ultimate family shame.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. This class divide wasn't just about money. No, it was built right into the language people spoke. The upper and lower classes had totally different dialects, which created this vertical wall that was pretty much impossible to climb. And get this, an upper-class person could listen to working-class music and seem free-spirited, but a working-class person trying to adopt upper-class tastes, they'd just be mocked. It was a one-way street.
And look, this repression wasn't some vague social pressure. For de Beauvoir, it was deeply personal. Her own mother was the enforcer of all these rules. She'd read her daughter's private letters, obsess over their schoolwork, and, in this case, literally slap her adult university-age daughter for the simple act of putting on makeup, declared she was casting out the devil. Just incredible.
So you can see why she had to rebel, right? And her rebellion wasn't just intellectual. She lived it. Her lifelong partnership with the famous existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre was a direct middle finger to every single convention of her society, starting with marriage itself.
So instead of marriage, they cooked up this 2-year renewable contract. It was this wild social and philosophical experiment designed to put individual freedom above everything else. They called their relationship the essential love, but they explicitly gave each other permission to have contingent loves with other people. The one major catch? They had to be brutally honest with each other about everything.
You see, this was them trying to actually live their philosophy. For existentialists like them, an authentic life meant you create your own values, you live freely, you don't just accept the roles society hands you. And their relationship, as scandalous as it was to everyone else, was their ultimate act of self-definition.
Okay, so let's get to the book itself. Let's see how this life of rebellion and deep philosophical thought led to The Second Sex, a book that would send shockwaves all over the planet.
So the year is 1949. De Beauvoir takes all of it, her personal experience, years of intense research into history, biology, mythology, you name it, and she pours it into this absolute monster of a book. We're talking almost 1,000 pages, analyzing the history of women's oppression.
In this massive work, she basically sets out to answer 4 huge questions. Her central argument is that throughout all of history, man has been positioned as the subject. The default, the standard human. And woman, she's been cast as the other. She isn't defined on her own terms, but always, always in relation to him.
Now, this is the absolutely crucial point. De Beauvoir was not denying biological reality. Of course not. What she was arguing is that society has used these biological facts as a pretext, as a kind of shackle, to justify locking women into a specific role. The ability to have children became a destiny, a reason to keep women out of public life and trap them in economic and social dependency.
The reaction to the book was immediate. It was widespread and, well, it was overwhelmingly negative. But the power of the ideas inside, impossible to contain.
The book was savaged. People called it an attack on French decency. You had husbands who supposedly forbade their wives from reading it. Even her former friend, the famous writer Albert Camus, attacked it. And the Vatican? They put the book on their official index of forbidden books, basically branding it a work of evil.
But this just shows you the incredible journey of an idea.
Even though it was met with total outrage at first, the book was rediscovered in the 1960s by a whole new generation of activists. Women in the second-wave feminist movement found that de Beauvoir had already perfectly articulated the exact problems they were facing. What was once a scandal became a foundational text. It became a Bible for modern feminism. And that brings us right back to where we started. By separating biological sex from the social construct of gender, de Beauvoir didn't just explain a problem, she offered a path to liberation. Because if woman is a set of roles and expectations that are made, not born, well then they can be unmade, they can be re-examined, and they can be rebuilt. Which leaves us with a powerful, timeless question about who we are, and more importantly, who we can choose to become.
Back in 1949, a book was published that absolutely ignited a revolution in how we think about gender, identity, and power. That book, of course, was The Second Sex by the French existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. So let's dive into this foundational text and unpack the explosive ideas that honestly continue to shape our world today. It all starts with this one single electrifying sentence. Seriously, this is the central mystery we're going to unravel. What could she possibly mean by that? I mean, aren't the differences between men and women just obvious, a simple fact of nature? Well, de Beauvoir argued that the answer is so much more complex and way more constructed than we think. To get to her famous conclusion, de Beauvoir basically had to become a master mythbuster. She systematically took on the big pillars used to justify women's place in society: biology, psychology, and history. We're going to follow her investigation and see exactly how she dismantled each and every one. All right, first up, the most common and powerful argument of them all: biological destiny. You've heard it a million times. It's the idea that women's social roles are just the natural outcome of their bodies. Men are stronger, women bear children, and that's just the way it is. It seems pretty straightforward, right? But de Beauvoir saw a huge flaw in this logic. Now, what's so important to get here is that de Beauvoir never denies biology. Of course, physical differences exist. Her whole point, the crucial insight, is that biology itself is neutral. It's society that looks at these differences and attaches a value judgment to them. Society takes the fact of childbirth and turns it into a reason for economic dependence. It takes a difference in average strength and turns it into a whole system of dominance. This really challenges the whole idea of a fixed, permanent male physical dominance. In fact, the source material points to research suggesting that in other eras, that physical gap just wasn't what we assume it is today. And that kind of blows up the whole argument that our current social structure is based on some timeless, unchanging physical law. So, the bottom line is this: our bodies don't write our destiny. Society does. Biology provides the raw material, the situation, as she calls it, but it's our social structures, our values, and our laws that shape that situation into a hierarchy of power. Okay, so with the myth of biology out of the way, de Beauvoir turned her attention to the next big explanation. Next on the list, de Beauvoir took on the incredibly popular and influential ideas of Sigmund Freud. In the mid-20th century, Freudian psychoanalysis was a huge force in explaining human behavior, and it had a very specific and pretty famous theory about female psychology. At the very heart of Freud's theory was this concept: penis envy. The idea was that at a young age, a girl realizes she's anatomically different from a boy, feels that she is lacking something, and that this sense of deficiency shapes her entire life. It supposedly makes her passive, narcissistic, and defined by what she doesn't have. De Beauvoir's rebuttal here was just devastating. First, she points out the obvious. This is a theory about women written entirely from a man's point of view. A bit of a red flag, right? Second, she argued that, little kids are often just not that interested in anatomy. But her most powerful point was this: a girl doesn't envy the physical object itself. She envies the privileges that come with it, the freedom, the power, the encouragement to go out and conquer the world. She envies the social position that it represents in a patriarchal society. Okay, so if it's not biology and it's not psychology, then what is it? After clearing away all those myths, de Beauvoir presented her own stunning explanation, one rooted in philosophy, history, and economics. She argued that the fundamental dynamic of human society is this division between the self and the other. This right here is the absolute core of her philosophy. Throughout history, she argues man has positioned himself as the subject, the default human. He's the standard, the norm. Woman, on the other hand, is cast as the other. She isn't defined on her own terms, but always in relation to him. She's the mother, the wife, the daughter. She is the second sex. But how did this even happen? De Beauvoir actually traced it all back to a fundamental economic shift. In early hunter-gatherer societies, she says, the sexes were relatively equal partners in survival. But then came the agricultural revolution, which brought surplus food and, for the first time ever, private property. All of a sudden, men with land and wealth needed to make sure they could pass it down to their biological heirs. And the only way to guarantee paternity? Well, that was to control women's freedom. And so social structures like marriage were created to confine women and basically turn them into vessels for the family line. It wasn't natural, it was all about economics. So this brings us all the way back to that famous quote. If a woman is made, how exactly does that happen? De Beauvoir shows it's not some single event, but 1,000 tiny daily lessons that begin in childhood, actively shaping a girl into the socially accepted ideal of what a woman should be. And this process is made crystal clear through her examples. The boy is encouraged to be adventurous, assertive, powerful, to climb things, to fight, to explore. The girl, meanwhile, is taught to be cautious, passive, and contained. De Beauvoir even uses the example of urinating. For a boy, standing up is an act of power, of aiming and mastering his world. For a girl, squatting is taught as a hidden, even shameful act. From the playground all the way to puberty, the message is constant. A boy's destiny is to act upon the world. A girl's destiny is to be acted upon. This quote just perfectly captures the tragic irony of the whole situation. Society systematically restricts a woman's ambitions, her education, her freedom, and then turns around and criticizes her for not achieving as much as a man. It's a cage of expectations that's built from the moment she's born. So after this incredibly profound diagnosis of the problem, what's the cure? Well, de Beauvoir doesn't just leave us with a critique. She actually outlines a path forward, a way to break free from this construct of the other and reclaim one's own identity as a full human subject. The first step is just awareness, really understanding that these roles aren't natural. But the most critical step for de Beauvoir is economic independence. Without the ability to support herself, a woman can never be truly free. And this can't just be an individual struggle. It absolutely requires collective action, a shared effort by women to change the very structures of society. Ultimately, her vision isn't about replacing one hierarchy with another. It's about ending the whole idea of hierarchy. The goal is a world of reciprocity, where every single individual, man or woman, is recognized as a free and independent subject, defined not by their relation to others, but by their own projects and their own humanity. So if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. For Simone de Beauvoir, our identity is not a pre-written script. We are not prisoners of our bodies or our childhoods. We are products of a historical and social situation, and that situation was built by humans, which means it can be unbuilt and rebuilt by humans too. And that leaves us with a final, really powerful question. De Beauvoir wrote this over 70 years ago, and yet her ideas feel more relevant than ever. If the definition of woman is something we, as a society, create, what are the myths we still need to bust today? And what role do each of us play, every single day, in either reinforcing the old constructs or building something completely new?